So, Food Science and Nutrition Lecture 1, Part 1. Start looking at micronutrients. Look at the difference between them and macronutrients. Have a look at what's in an orange. Talk a little bit about DRVs. And then define what vitamins and minerals are. And look in a bit of detail at calcium. I'm not going to cover every vitamin and mineral. Don't really have the time to do that. But we'll do some key ones. There's plenty of material out there for you to read if you're interested. Okay, what is the most important biological molecule? Biologists will likely say DNA. If they're not molecular biologists, they might say ATP, but really it's water, of which almost all biology is mostly composed of. Jellyfish is 96%. We aren't that much less. So, water. Interesting, last week's New Scientist had an article about the importance of water, linking through to a paper which talks about this. I have to be honest, it's not saying anything I've not been saying for years. It's included in the notes for you to have a read of. Obviously, water is both a solvent for life, but also involved in many chemical reactions. Synthesis of larger molecules or hydrolysis of molecules all involves water. It's a terminal reaction in cellular respiration, which we'll talk about later on. Very important molecule. Okay, a key distinction. Macro and micronutrients. Now, macronutrients, a very simple way of thinking about this is if you weighed out the amount in typical food, you'd be able to see it easily. I haven't included sodium in there. I probably should have, and probably potassium as well. They sort of come into a category. Are they macronutrients? Are they micronutrients? Certainly, sodium is a macronutrient, probably potassium as well, because we need gram quantities each day. So, water, carbohydrates, proteins and fats are classed as macronutrients. Relatively large amounts of these substances in most foods. Vitamin and minerals are also present, but in lower amounts, and they're classified as micronutrients. And if you look at the two groups, you'll see, okay, the minerals, which are these over here, potassium, calcium, magnesium and phosphorus, are sort of percentages of small percentages, but you look at the vitamins, they are very small amounts indeed. Vitamin E 2 times 10 to the minus 7%, so that's riboflavin. Vitamin B2 4 times 10 to the minus 8%. So we don't need much of these in our diets, though we do need them for reasons we'll discuss in a little while. Yeah, okay, so people who are not well informed about science often complain that such and such a food contains chemicals. Well, of course it does. Everything is made up of chemicals, apart from the hypothetical dark matter, I suppose, but no one knows what that is. In the case of food, it's principally water, except foods that have been very, very dried, like dry pasta, for example, but that still contains quite a lot of water. So here's a list of chemicals from food for a particular food. Have a quick read through the list. There are some, particularly toward the end of the list, compounds which you will be familiar with. Probably many will be new and maybe somewhat mysterious. So maybe pause the video and just have a read through this list. Okay, I don't expect you to remember all these, of course. I assume you've had a little read through them. Right, we're going to do a little bit of categorization here. These are the main chemicals found in fruits like orange. It's probably a partial list, but it's reasonably representative of the main molecules and categories. Remembering, of course, that water is by far and away the biggest ingredient. The carotenoids are responsible for the orange colour and have many important roles in health, which we will discuss a little bit later on. Both in the context of this particular lecture and also when we discuss food colours later in the module. Note the large number of substances associated with flavour. Oranges, like the vast majority of our food, have been genetically modified by selective breeding to enhance desirable characteristics like taste. Sugars are, of course, a part of the plant's energy store. Again, we perhaps selectively bred to increase the amount of sugars to impact on the taste. We'll discuss vitamins and minerals shortly, and of course, as I mentioned, water. What's in an orange? So I've got a data visualization here, so I'll pause the video in a second and then I'll open it up and we'll have a look at it again. It's using something called a tree map, which is a sort of data visualization which can be used to look at the different amounts of macro and micronutrients found in an orange. So I did this a while back. You'll bear with me a second while I just open this up. Right, I'm back. So this is an attempt I did to visually show the scale of difference between macronutrients and micronutrients in an orange. So what's in an orange? So macronutrients 96% nearly, and over here a couple of little bubbles, which are the micronutrients. If we drill down a bit further, we can take these off. This is an interactive visualization, so if you want to have a look at it, you can take things off and have a look at what's available. So it's got rid of the macronutrients there. Just bring back the minerals. It's got it there. Okay, bring everything back. Right, it's mostly water. As we discussed, it's mostly water, 86%. Over here, there's a big chunk for carbohydrates, about 8.5%. Over here, proteins. Of course, there's proteins like every other living thing. Then fats in the cell walls, which we've discussed a little bit earlier on. Vitamins, and the one that's picking out is vitamin C, and then a long tail of various minerals. So again, we're looking at a different scale of these in terms of macronutrients and micronutrients. So we'll now go down to look at micronutrients. We've got rid of all the macronutrients, just leaving the micronutrients behind. And we'll notice that the biggest component is vitamin C, somewhat because it's important to the plant. It has a role for the plant, but obviously we've selectively bred, as mentioned, to increase the amounts of these things. And then we can see these big green ones for minerals, and if you look closely, you'll see a number of little red dots, and there are various other vitamins, very small amounts, so small the system can't actually render the percentage. There's a couple of other graphs there, tables and charts, which we can skip past, I think. So this is something I came back many years ago in an ancient science magazine called Omni, which I eventually was able to track down a photograph of, which had an image of showing a orange with the various things in it. It's a partial list. I should have actually started with this, but never mind. Look at macronutrients again. I've got everything listed, and it's got some information here. So if we want to take off, this is a fully interactive one. So we just want to bring back the macronutrients. We can just bring them back. Bring back the vitamins and minerals. Bring them back. Maybe take out the macronutrients to allow us to see the vitamins and minerals. So that's an example of using, I guess I include this as an example of how we can use dynamic visualizations to help us understand numerical questions. And then there's another one on micronutrients, which we've already seen. Right, okay, so I'll close that up. So that's available via this link here. Right, so moving on. Right, moving on to dietary reference values. Okay, so a balanced diet provides adequate range of micronutrients in order to maintain health and well-being. So there's a link here through to an interactive tool, which we'll talk about in a second. Nutrient requirements depend on age, gender, level of physical activity, physiological status such as pregnancy, dietary habits and genetic backgrounds. As we've discussed on many occasions, people are complex. And what works for one person may not necessarily work for others. So we can make population recommendations, which are what dietary reference values are. So DRVs are the term for a set of nutrient values that include the average daily requirement based on populations. They're not nutrient goals or recommendations for individuals. If you look in here and see the facts, it'll talk to me in a bit more detail about this. They're used by policymakers in bodies like the EU and individual countries, including the UK, to issue recommendations on nutrient intake to consumers. And they provide the basis for things like the balance of good health as well. DRVs are also used to provide the base of the information on food labels, and as I mentioned, establishing dietary guidelines. The purpose of which is to help consumers make healthy dietary choices. So the point about this is taking some quite complex information and in the guidelines producing it in a form which people will understand. So this is linking back to what we talked about, things like UDL. The EFSA link here includes a useful interactive tool that gives quick and easy access to their DRVs for nutrients. It's intended for end users of these values, such as nutrition health professionals, which you will be, of course, risk managers, policymakers, food manufacturers, and scientists. So explore it. For any other reading, any up-to-date nutrition textbook. Right, macronutrients such as protein are needed in multiple gram quantities. Vitamins and most minerals are only needed in very small amounts, perhaps micrograms per kilogram of body weight. Sodium, although it has negative health issues in that the amount consumed in diets in the developed world is probably too high, it is an essential nutrient. For this reason, it is usually discussed in terms of the maximum we should consume, typically around 2.4 grams of sodium daily, which is equivalent to about 6 grams of salt. And if you look up the data for this country, you'll see the average is about 8.5 grams or something. But since it's gram quantity, it's covered under macronutrients, not micronutrients, so I won't be reviewing this. Similarly, the UK RDA of potassium is 3.5 grams daily. So it's a macronutrient. It's high in plants such as kale, and low sodium salt uses potassium chloride. Again, that would be classed as a macronutrient. Okay, Albert St. George was a Hungarian biochemist who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1937. He is credited with first isolating vitamin C and discovering the components and reactions of a citric acid cycle, which is part of cellular respiration, which he'll do more in second year. And he's also very quotable, and I think that's a good definition of a vitamin there. So, this definition is from Gibney et al. In the book Introduction to Human Metabolism, which is one of the books we recommend. They're needed in very small amounts, but we do need them. With one exception, they are all nutritionally essential. That is, we must obtain them from our diet. Most vitamins, of course, are synthesized by plants for their own purposes, and we obtain them by eating food, either by eating plants directly or eating other animals which have eaten plants. Ultimately, everything comes back to plants. Yes, they are essential with one exception. The exception is vitamin D, of course. Talk about vitamin D in the second part of this lecture. You may come across the term essential oils. Just to be clear, essential oils have got nothing to do with essential nutrients, but actually refer to the other components characteristic of some natural oils. The one vitamin isn't essential. We've just talked about what that is. It's vitamin D. There's vitamin B12, a complex molecule. As I mentioned, I'm not going to review every vitamin and mineral. That would take too long, and there are many good sources for you to explore yourself. But a key distinction is between the fat-soluble and the water-soluble vitamins. We can store the fat-soluble vitamins, but not the water-soluble ones. A consequence of this is that vitamin deficiency diseases associated with water-soluble vitamins present much faster than those for the fat-soluble ones. Yeah, so we can store the fat-soluble ones, often in places like the liver. We can't store the water-soluble ones. Okay, minerals defined there. Again, this definition is from Gibney. They are nutritionally essential, and there's a growing range of them. We'll talk about some of the main ones, but it does seem that lots of minerals. In this case, as you can see by the little labels here, they are elements. They are metallic elements, essentially, to avoid a pun. There's a periodic table of minerals, and you can link through to it via the link there. They're all elements, mostly metals, so we obviously can't synthesize them for ourselves. We don't synthesize vitamins for ourselves, generally, apart from vitamin D, because in evolutionary terms, it seems to have been better just to let plants synthesize them for us. Okay, so on the left is a list of the most important minerals, starting with calcium, which we will talk about in some detail. Trace elements are also essential nutrients your body needs to work properly, but in much smaller amounts than vitamins and minerals. And note that although we refer to minerals, we really mean their soluble forms, not the metals themselves. Right, so I'm going to pause. I'm going to have a break in this video now, and we'll come back in a second with the second part of part one.